Jim Needham, thanks so much for joining us on Wall Street Unplugged.
Hey, Frank. It's great to be on.
Well, before we start, since first-time guest, why don't you give us a little background? You've been in banking, finance, been in this industry pretty close to 2 decades, I believe, in primary, secondary capital markets in London. But why don't you give us a little bit of background? This way everybody gets to know you. It's you are a first-time guest.
No probs. Yeah, you've got it pretty much nail on the head there. I studied law at university, and then from uni I went straight to work at in investment banking at Morgan Stanley in London. And I was involved there and at Kleinwort Benson as well. I did sort of investment banking, you know, the stuff you do at the junior end of your career, lots of pitch decks and Excel spreadsheets. But it was a great grounding in you know, the whole financial services industry, and it was a fantastic team of people to learn from. So I ended up specializing in equity capital markets, in particular equity linked stuff. So that's convertible bonds and exchangeable bonds. Did that for a few years. Did some pretty kind of you know, big name issuances. Convertible bonds was a big space then after the sort of collapse of the tech bubble. So I lived through the tech bubble, sitting in a investment bank in London. And then I moved on to the secondary side, and I spent the next 12 years as a salesman of equity derivatives, mainly for, you know, large cap European companies servicing investment banks, trading desks, hedge funds, market makers. And then 2016, I kind of had my eye turned by what was going on in the crypto space, really, or more to the fact I was actually alerted to the fact that I had a complete ignorance of this space altogether. And I ended up signing up for a course that Oxford University were running, which was a blockchain program. And they taught you everything from, you know, just literally the sort of ABCs of what blockchain is, and all the way through to kind of putting together a strategic framework for what blockchain can be used for. And I came out of the other side of that and ended up joining the MERJ team, who building something just like fantastically interesting, and it was a perfect sort of synthesis of the career that I'd had and this new skill set that I'd sort of developed doing this blockchain program.
When did you know, Jim, when you're in digital securities? Because I'm going to say, you know, even though you worked in London, you know, the Wall Street side, right? So the Wall Street side of investment banking. I think even today, you know, people are finally starting to realize. You're seeing Bitcoin go even higher. You're seeing more companies adopt it, where it's PayPal, Square, and now you're actually seeing J.P. Morgan like totally flip it and be so positive on blockchain. But you know, getting that Wall Street over to the digital side is hard. When did you know? I mean, was it just by taking this class at Oxford afterwards? And when did you know this thing was for real and it's going to be big and it has potential to be huge?
I think when you first. Everybody talks about going down the rabbit hole, and when you first grasp what blockchain does, what it's good for, what this sort of decentralized approach is capable of, it's just a massive eye opener, and you just see this world of opportunity, really, because everything you look at, you think, wow, that could be done better. And I think anybody who spends the time, I was actually advised by a mate who said, look, just go and lock yourself in a room for a day and just read about Bitcoin and blockchain and try and get your head around it. And it was the best advice I was ever given, because it is really, you have this kind of breakthrough moment where you're like, wow, this is going to change everything.
I mean, I can identify with you because, again, being from Wall Street and then seeing this, you know, I wasn't crazy about utility tokens. It just the compliance. It wasn't enough information on the industry. You don't get equity stakes. But then when I really started digging into security tokens and even talking to my great contacts, you know, that I know for decades, the same thing. I was like, hey, you know, this is really exciting stuff. What am I missing here? And then when they all saw it, they're like, wow, this is pretty cool. You know, the only thing you really need is, you know, for this to be adopted and liquidity, but the idea just makes sense on every single level. And what was your choice? Like, what made you join MERJ? Because I think, you know, with that Wall Street background and now into digital securities, I would think right now there's a lot of companies, a lot of major firms out there that want to get into digital securities and want to learn more about it. So, you know, what made you choose MERJ and you know, talk about that story, which is, you know, we're using MERJ right now. We're going to be launching on your exchange with our Curzio Equity Owners token, but I'd love to hear that story because I don't think I've heard that story yet.
Well, so I think it sort of ties back to what you were saying there about utility tokens. So there's a huge amount of potential in this technology. But you also need you can't throw everything out from the old world, you know, the world of regulation and investor protections is all there for very good reasons. And so I think the only way that this was going to work is if you're combining a recognized traditional regulatory framework that is established and works, and you're combining that with the technology. And MERJ had a really fantastic, almost unique opportunity to do that, and was probably onto doing that far earlier than most of the competitors out there. So that's what attracted me to joining them, because they really had the regulatory framework to do it properly, but they also had the foresight and the ability to start to use this technology in kind of a select way, in a way that I think most major markets around the world hadn't got the ability to do that.
So now MERJ Exchange, you are incorporated in Seychelles in 2011, right? So Exchange went live in 2012. I guess talk a little bit about Seychelles, and also talk about MERJ, where you're an exchange. And I think even from my group of people and investors, they think there's a big difference between an alternative trading platform, which is what you're seeing with the T0s and stuff like that, and even open finances, compared to you have an actual exchange in terms of regulation. But talk about that process, and even being in Seychelles, because some people may look at it and say, "Wow, you're already in Seychelles," but we went through the regulatory process. It was unbelievable. It was amazing. But why don't you talk about it and tell us a little bit about it?
Well, shall I start by giving you a bit of a history of MERJ, because that probably lays it all out. Would that make sense?
Yeah, that's great. Go ahead.
Yeah. So it goes back to as early as 2009, and it was after the global financial crisis. There was an economic reform program put in place in the Seychelles, which was a project that was backed by the likes of the World Bank and the IMF, and it was really to try and regenerate and diversify the Seychelles economy post-crisis. And a central part of that was to build a securities market, which the Seychelles didn't have. So there was a drive to build a financial services sector in the Seychelles, and in order to do that, they needed to establish a securities market. So the government put out an RFP to exchange operators globally for someone to establish and operate the Seychelles national securities market infrastructure. So people often ask, why are you guys in the Seychelles? And it's not so much that MERJ chose the Seychelles, it's more that the Seychelles needed a securities market, and the MERJ team were the right people to build it. So this thing started back in 2011, like you say, was when MERJ was incorporated, but there were a few years before that, applications and quite a lot of heavy duty stuff. But it launched in 2011. First listing was 2013. But really, it's been a collaborative effort between everybody in the Seychelles, the government, the Ministry of Finance, the central bank, the regulators, and us to build everything that you need to have a regulated securities market. So that's the sort of background to it. And it began as it was to service the domestic market, to list hotel groups, banks, insurance companies. But the MERJ team always had an eye on, this was an opportunity to start building a stock exchange from the ground up in 2011. And so it was a great opportunity to do something a little bit different, and a key part of that was to leverage technology where possible, to try and reduce costs, to try and reduce the administrative burden. But another thing that was sort of a major principle from the beginning was not to be as insular as some stock exchanges are around the world. We deliberately built the whole framework so that we could work with regulated partners from all around the world, as long as they're in jurisdictions that we recognize, and to work in a way that encouraged people to participate in our ecosystem. It's a multi-currency market, and we welcome infrastructure providers, sponsors, members, broker-dealers from all around the world. As long as they're regulated in their jurisdiction, they can become part of MERJ's ecosystem. So that was really what the goal was at the beginning in 2011, was to build this kind of global stock exchange venue.
And talk about the difference between the stock exchange venue compared to alternative trading platform, because we know that now because we went through the due diligence process, which was extremely thorough, which is great. It took a little bit of while, but we like that, right? I mean, I think if someone's going to come on an exchange, you need to go through this process. We want more transparency, and if you're doing the right thing, everything, it's good. It really, but the due diligence process was absolutely incredible. But talk about that difference, and also maybe if you can talk about the regulations in Seychelles, all the regulations for you being an exchange, right? And the process that you have to go through is a lot more stringent than just being an alternative trading platform.
Sure. So an alternative trading system there's similarities with what we do. I mean, an ATS matches buyers and sellers on a regulated venue. The difference is an ATS isn't regulated as an exchange. They're usually run by a broker-dealer, and you'll notice in the US they're not referred to as exchanges, they're referred to as secondary market venues or trading venues. Whereas what MERJ is an exchange. It's regulated as an exchange. And I think the key point of difference is, like you mentioned there about the process you have to go through. Exchanges have to have a set of listing rules. NASDAQ has got its listing rules. New York Stock Exchange has got its listing rules. Now, issuers have to go through the process laid out in the listing rules, and they have to meet all the criteria, and they have to tick all the boxes that are laid out there. And that's what it is to be a primary listing venue. And once an issuer has gone through that process and has met the listing rules, and that's initially when they list, but also there's ongoing obligations which they'll have to stick to, then the security it sort of transitions to becoming an exchange listed security. And that's a different status to securities that are unlisted. And there's some key benefits. For example, institutional investment mandates would often stipulate they can only invest in exchange-listed securities. So you're opening up the pool of capital that can access your security quite significantly by going through this listing process on a recognized stock exchange venue.
And you are an affiliate of the World Federation of Exchanges. Why is that such a big deal?
Well, so I mean, I'll tell you a little bit about the way we're regulated. So we're regulated as an exchange. We're also regulated as a clearing agency and a securities facility and depository. So we've got all the infrastructure that's required to run a securities market. In the US, you have different pieces. You have New York Stock Exchange and then DTC running these different pieces. So we have the licenses to run the whole thing from end to end, which is a great advantage if you want to support something like distributed ledger technology. But our regulatory framework is it's almost a bit supranational, really, because all regulation, the whole point of it is investor protection. That's what it's all focused on. And a lot of these policies come from, locally we're regulated by the Seychelles Financial Services Authority, but they are themselves an associate of an international body called IOSCO. That's the International Organization of Securities Commissions, I think. Now, IOSCO lay out the standards and principles for securities market regulators globally. So the SEC is a member, CFTC is a member, right? So a lot of these policies and principles that we have to live up to are global. They're international principles. So we've got IOSCO, who's at the sort of the top of the triangle. Then there are other bodies like the Financial Action Task Force, the OECD, who are also laying out these international principles that operators of market infrastructure have to live up to. So our regulatory framework is really not that different from other markets that you'd be more familiar with around the world. You mentioned the World Federation of Exchanges. So that's a global body that is it's a trade body for operators of securities markets. It's for exchanges, it's not for ATSs. And there's a set of principles and guidelines and standards which they want all their members and affiliates to live up to. So it's a real sort of badge of honor that is recognized between affiliates and members that you're part of this group. We're also part of other bodies like ANA, which is the Association of National Numbering Agencies. They're the guys that allow you to be an issuer of ISIN numbers. And if you look at the other members of ANA around the world, it's the likes of the London Stock Exchange, QSIP, Tokyo Stock Exchange, Clearstream, Euroclear, big mainstays of the global markets. And these are not lightweight organizations. So there's a ton of checks and balances, and all the things that we have to do have to be really buttoned down to be able to become part of these organizations. To give you an idea, we started our journey with Anna in 2013 and became a full member this year. So these things are, they're heavy duty processes. OTC markets in the US, we're recognized as a qualifying foreign exchange, and it's because, we've been through lots of these processes with lots of these organizations. OTC markets are able to look at who we are, what we do, how we do things, and say, yes, we can recognize the standards that are in place at MERJ. So in a way, the sort of regulatory framework that we adhere to is a kind of supranational one rather than specifically a Seychelles one.
Yeah, and Jim, I appreciate you sharing all of that, because, and my audience is right now, they're probably almost falling asleep because they're going through regulations and stuff. But it's very important, right? Because we're talking about crypto, and a lot of people, especially with the utility tokens, have done it the wrong way, and you see a lot of things show up. But everyone that's listening to this right now, a lot of you have requested, and I've been telling you about this process that we're going to be launching. We're going to be launching the MERJ Exchange. I want to say it's going to be Thursday, which is tomorrow. So, which is very exciting. But I want people to understand what we went through and what you went through in order to do this, and the background checks and the compliance issues, because for me, and I always said this to you and you agreed, it's the most important thing for me was compliance and transparency, because once you have that with this industry, I really think that this is going to be a $1 trillion plus industry. It just makes sense on every single level when you're looking at digital assets. And I wanted to congratulate you, because even with MERJ, I believe you have over 40 listings. It's over a $1.4 billion total market cap of everything listed there, and world's fastest growing exchange from 2019 to 2020, which is amazing. It shows you guys are doing the right thing. But let's talk about security tokens to the point, because you have just regular securities trading on there, and now we're looking at security tokens, where I believe we might be the 4th listed there, the Curzio Equity Owners token. I guess if you could transition a little bit into that, because it seems like that platform, your exchange that trades both, securities, derivatives, and also security tokens. But where do you see this industry going from here in terms of security tokens? Because again, you only have 4 listed now, but having this as an exchange instead of going to an alternative trading platform and having that transparency and those extra layers of compliance, I could see your exchange really taking off now.
Yeah, I mean, we see it as quite important that we support both types of security. And the way we always, when we approached our regulator in 2015 to say, we think distributed ledger technology could be a great tool for us. We're running a multi-currency, multi-product, multi-jurisdictional platform. And this idea of one source of truth for the ownership of securities makes huge sense, right? And we've always wanted to use technology to strip out costs, strip out unnecessary administrative burden, and this is just a really good tool for doing it. So the way when we engage with our regulators, the way we pitched it to them is that we're not changing anything about the definition of a security. It's the same rights, obligations, reporting requirements, etc. What we're changing is the method of recording ownership, and I think that was an important point. And I think securities regulators around the world are coming to the same conclusion, that we're not creating a new asset class here. We're just using a new technology, which is an evolution of the old technology, to do it in a better way. So we got approval last year. It was a 3-year process of educating the regulator what the technology does, what the risks are of using it, what the ways the ways that you mitigate those risks, and so on. But right now, I mean, if I was an issuer, it makes so much sense, right, to use this technology. If I was an issuer and I was about to do list a company in the next year, I'd look at the landscape and I'd think, well, do I want to use yesterday's technology, or do I want to use tomorrow's technology? Because there are so many, apart from the basic, functionality of using a distributed ledger, you've got all these new things that we can't imagine yet, new business models, new incentive models, new ways of reporting, new ways of auditing, all these new things that can be built into a dynamic token that can't be built into a static security. And that's going to be what drives the next generation of new companies. I think you go back 20 years, you couldn't imagine what the combination of a smartphone and a mobile network would do. But here we are 20 years later, and the likes of Airbnb and Uber, you wouldn't have even conceived that these companies could exist. But here they are. And the top, you've got your Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, Alphabet, Google. What's the other one? The FANG stocks.
Apple, Google,
Apple, that's it.
Netflix,
These companies are all built on that combination of smartphone technology and fast networks and mobile networks. And I think in 20 years' time, the biggest companies in the world will have been the ones that identified that there's a real opportunity right now to harness this technology to create entirely new business models that we can't even think of today.
Yeah, and you mentioned for the issuers like us, the costs that we saved were incredible. Where it's extremely expensive, and even to list on something like the NASDAQ and New York Stock Exchange, we probably have to generate a lot more in revenue than we're generating instead of a few $1 million. They want you a lot bigger. The time a lot of these companies come out. So for the issue it's great from a cost perspective. And you would talk about the technology, which is amazing, the new technology. But even for us, it allowed us to raise money as a small company. And why does that benefit actually investors is you're getting into our company at a very, very early stage where, listen, it is risky. Maybe people stop buying newsletters and the publishing industry doesn't work and nobody likes me on this podcast anymore. But it gives me an opportunity to really raise money to grow our business. And it also gives the people who are investing in my company the opportunity to get in on the ground floor, right? I think that's so important, Jim, because you've been in the capital markets, you're seeing what's going on, like even the Airbnbs who are going to go public, but even the Ubers, Snowflake at what, a $50 billion valuation. Alibaba is going to have like one of the biggest IPOs ever at they're going to raise $37 billion. But the time these things go public, and the average investor, the retail investor, could buy these things. You're talking about a lot of that growth already gone, where that's kind of seen as that IPO is almost like a liquidity event for everyone who bought it really early. I just think it checks off every single box. Would you agree with that, or is it kind of I
couldn't agree more. It's actually a major social problem, right? Because actually the growth of these mega successful companies, lots of it has been captured in the private markets. And really, we need to share that growth. They need to be shared more in the public markets because we need our pension funds really to be able to benefit from this upside, not just from the last 5%. They need the 80,000% or whatever it was with Amazon. And I think this is a tool for bringing it blurs the lines, doesn't it, a little bit between what's a public and what's a private market. But I think if you've got something which has got the regulatory framework around it that we have, that means you have the status as a listed security, but also you have this technology which is able to bring the accessibility down and make it, available to a wider audience. I think you're just redressing the balance a little bit there, and you're bringing these opportunities to get into these companies to a big and important piece of the population.
So let's get into. So we're going to be listing tomorrow which is Thursday, and our Curzio Equity Owners Token. And we've been saying, hey, we're almost ready. We're almost there. And again, we were talking. We just want to make sure we check off all the boxes, and more important, we want to make it as easy as possible, right? Just to throw it out there. 2 months ago, and then people are going to be asking questions. Well, how do I sign up for an account? How do I do that? Let's cover that right now. So if somebody wants to actually trade my token or trade anything else on your exchange, how could they do that? Can you take us through that process?
Yeah, we've tried to make it pretty streamlined. It's you go to our website, MERJ.exchange, and you go through the process to create a new account, and that's the sort of familiar onboarding process that most people will be aware of. Customer due diligence, KYC, AML, all those processes. But if you've got all the information at your fingertips, it's a 10-minute job, and then it generally takes us sort of 24 hours to process those applications, and you'll get an email, welcoming you to the MERJ ecosystem as a direct participant. Once that's done, you've actually got access to all the markets available on our boards that are open to your jurisdiction, and it's a question of funding your account. And it's an execution-only platform, Frank. So people have to do their own. They have to do their own research. So in the case of the CEO token, they need to read your materials. They need to read the the disclosures, the listing particulars, and so on to understand the product. But all that information is there, and that's a core part of the listing process. All that information has to be out there for people to be able to access. But once they're comfortable and they want to make the decision, then it's a question of funding your account and putting a bid in the market.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting because you're saying that they have to do the due diligence where if they click, Curzio Research, they can go over everything and everything will be listed. But it's so funny how that seems so natural for guys like us who are in the, familiar with investment banking. You've been in the industry your whole life. But then when I look at some of these utility tokens, you have no idea how much cash they have on hand. You have no idea what they're spending it on. Again, you're not getting an equity stake. There's just no transparency there. Where this, I mean, for us, we want to do it right because, and I think, it's same with you guys to the point where you see this industry where it does check all those boxes. And we're talking about industry for what I see it as the investment banking industry, one of the few industries that hasn't really been disrupted by technology, by the internet as much, where, these are middlemen that, provide, hey, you want to raise money? Okay, we're going to give you the people, and then they collect a fee. But everything that we're doing, even if it's Expedia's or whatever, those margins are getting smaller, because it's almost direct person to person, which is kind of amazing. But I want to ask you in terms of MERJ, and this is where I'm going with this. Where do you see this industry? Where do you see MERJ? Where do you see your exchange in 3 years, in 10 years? I mean, how big do you think this could actually get?
Well, good question. I mean, I think that, as I said before, this technology just makes perfect sense for the securities markets. It's kind of crazy that it's not the default already. But I think certainly in 5 years' time, people won't talk about security tokens. It'll just be securities. It'll just be how the markets operate. I think from MERJ's perspective, I mean, what we've always wanted to do is just build a place where investors from around the world can access interesting opportunities in a regulated way. So what we want to do is just add to that pool of possibilities. So we want a deep and liquid pool of high quality issuers that people can access. That's what we're trying to build. I mean, we've grown. You mentioned it earlier. We've grown pretty fast over the last few years, but as we've been going for 10, so it's one of those sort of overnight success stories that's taken 10 years of hard work. But we've grown, I think 1.6 billion is the market cap now, and the pipeline of people we've got approaching us looking to issue with us. I mean, the sky's the limit, to be honest with you, Frank. I think we did a small cap raise earlier this year. And our goal for the end of year 5 is to have a total capitalization of 30 billion US. And the way things are going at the moment, I think that's very achievable. The other thing that we want to do is make sure we use this technology to widen the pool of people who can access this even to as many as possible. So we're based in Africa. Lots of the African population have never had, fixed line computers or stockbrokers, but they've all got a smartphone. And what we really want to do is engage that demographic in the capital markets in a way that's been so successful in China, for example, over the last few years. I think that's one thing that's really high up our agenda, is to really engage with that demographic.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. I mean, I would consider that, retail investors. But and how many countries, even for our token when we launch, I mean, how many countries will it be available to through the MERJ Exchange?
I haven't got a number at my fingertips, but there's a handful of countries which are sanctioned for obvious reasons. But most countries that fall under the IOSCO umbrella of regulation, so that they're regulated by an IOSCO regulator, are recognized by MERJ. So we would accept participants from those jurisdictions. Yeah. So it's a lot.
And I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but it is pretty cool that New York Stock Exchange is not the easiest for investors in other countries to buy it. There's just like it's difficult for us to buy securities in other places. In Japan, where we can do it through ETFs and stuff here, but not directly there. It's just to me that's pretty incredible that it is a global exchange, and which we really didn't touch on too much, but that's kind of amazing. That's awesome. So. Jim, I want to say, dealing with your company, I mean, probably around a 6-month process around that now. Sometimes I was like, man, these guys are pain in the asses because, it's dotting every I, crossing every T. And that's exactly what we wanted. And, I'm really, really excited to be launching a MERJ Exchange. I just want to say thank you for everything. I know we've asked you thousands of questions. You've been there for us for a long time. And I'm sure just people listening to this, the small companies, I'm getting tons, lots and lots of companies and people who run their own companies asking me about this process. They want to make sure, they want to see if I fall flat on my face first. We're actually launching. They are coming to me and asking me, how do we do this process? How does this work? Because this makes so much sense. And I think you're right. I could see the growth in your exchange, over the next few years be extraordinary. So I'm really excited for you guys. And I just want to say thanks for allowing us to listen to your exchange, and really looking forward to tomorrow's launch.
Thanks, Frank. I got to say that the feeling's mutual. Actually, the whole MERJ team have enjoyed, our interaction with you, and kind of wish all issuers were as well prepared and as committed to doing things, the way you've done from the word go. So we sort of take our hat off to you as well.
Thanks, I appreciate that. And last thing here, if someone wants to learn more about your exchange, is it just go to the website? What's the easiest way to do that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is just to go to the website, merj.exchange. There's a lot of information on there. And there's a few email addresses on there. So if you want to spark up a conversation with us, ping an email. Probably best is to support@merj.exchange, and one of the team will get back to you straight away.
Yeah, and for those of you out there, frank@curzioresearch.com is my email address if you have any questions, and I could actually introduce you to Jim personally. I'll vet these guys and make sure that they're very serious about it, that they won't waste their time. But in case you want more information, you can do it that way as well. But Jim, I want to thank you for coming on. We have a big time difference here, so I appreciate it.
No worries.
Doing this interview across the country, but I know we're going to be talking a lot in the future. And again, I just want to say thanks for letting us listen to your exchange. Looking forward to tomorrow, and I appreciate you coming on the podcast, buddy.
Thanks a lot, Frank.